Michael, thank you so much for joining us here at SuperReturn Asia. It's a pleasure to have you at the event, and I'd really like to start by just asking you, in your stellar Olympic and athletics career, you needed to have, amazing resilience and talent, but also amazing
that part's very important.
and dedication to what you were doing. And I guess those are characteristics that this industry would very much value. What did it take for you to build those characteristics in yourself? And when did you sort of reach a point where you thought, actually, I know this is going to lead me to some success now? Is there a tipping point?
Yeah, right. There is, but it's never straightforward. That journey is always filled with, sort of twists and turns. Setbacks, doubt, am I actually ever going to get there? You have talent. So I realized early on that I had talent, which is very important. But realizing that talent and that potential is the key. And so for me, there were times when, I would get right there and then have a setback. And ultimately, sort of figuring out how to unlock that talent that you have. Takes a lot of resilience, belief, but confirmation of that, belief. Just because you want it, I wanted it. I wanted to be one of the best in the world. I wanted to be able to compete on that level. But I had to have confirmation that I actually had the talent. I thought I did. So you have to have some wins, some successes along the way. But there's probably going to be some setbacks, and for me, there were many early on. And it was the key there was just figuring out, okay, well, why am I having these setbacks? What's happening? Lots of injuries. And ultimately realized that, the call was coming from inside the house, so to speak. It was me not doing the things that, that were required of me to be a strong athlete who could, be resilient from a physical standpoint and minimize the risk of injury. And once I figured that out and started to, I was dedicated to some of the things that were required to be great. I loved to run, didn't really like, sort of the strength training and that sort of part of it, but I knew that was crucial to it, but I wasn't really as dedicated to it.
What's extraordinary is that you were, a very young, probably slightly immature man at that point, and like anyone would be at that age, but you managed to have that resilience to be able to carry on. And I guess that's what made you different, because so many people would have had those setbacks, faced those failures, and not picked themselves up and said, no, I know I've got this in me.
I think that comes down to, how bad do you really want it? And I wanted it badly. And so I was willing then to do the work to figure out, well, what's the issue here? What's the problem? And, and definitely at that point, not as mature as, as I was obviously in my my professional career, because I was just trying to get to it at that point. So, sort of 19, 20 years old. But I wanted it bad enough that I was willing to take the criticism of myself, and take the responsibility for what was happening and why I wasn't reaching my potential. That's where I think the issue comes from a lot, of young people trying to get there and why maybe they would give up at that point, because, it's always the tendency to blame someone else, the coach isn't coaching me properly, or, something else is happening that's not me, it's not in my control.
And it can take a long time, you've got to be resilient over a fairly long period.
And that was one of the things that was very fortunate for me, and I speak with a lot of young athletes now and explain to them that, if you're fortunate, you're very fortunate if you can learn those lessons early in your career, as opposed to, later in your career where you realize that that's what I needed to do. That's how I needed to approach this career, approach the journey to success. So I was able to learn those things very early and then able to apply them over and over again in my career.
And you did reach phenomenal success. You did persist and you reached those heights. But what's remarkable is you sustained them. You won a world championship. Most people would be happy with that. But no, you went on to win as many as you did. And, how did you sustain that success? What's required once you've reached that level? How do you keep going?
Yeah, I think, that is one of the difficult things for a lot of sports folks, sports men and women, but also for people in their careers as well. There's often that question, is it harder to get to the top or stay on top? they're both hard. They're both very difficult. They both require a different approach. And that is where I think a lot of people get stuck. What got you there isn't the same thing that's going to keep you there. It requires a different approach. You have to be able to retain those sort of core principles that got you to that success, but also now you've got to take a different approach. You often become a target once you are on top, and certainly in sports, now you are the target and you are the hunted. And so it takes a different approach from that standpoint. You have to, I was motivated, as an example, motivated on the way to the top, to getting to the top. Once I'm there, now my motivation has to be different. So what's my motivation now? So for me, it was, now I want to make history. I want to be the first to do, all of these different things in my career. And that became the motivation. So understanding what your motivation is and how that changes over time is critical.
And you were never going to stand still. You were going to keep going with those ambitions. That's something this industry can obviously relate to. They need to keep going and finding those new successes and those new sort of places to invest. Just moving on slightly, one thing that this audience also rely on are good teams around them. You were obviously an individual as a sprinter, but you also operated in teams, sort of relay teams and part of national squads. What would you say about how you get the best out of a team when you have got superstar players in the squad, if you like?
Yeah, it is, that's where dedication really becomes critical. Dedication to what? To the team's success. And all of the athletes that I competed with were all individual athletes. A lot of people don't really understand this as well, that imagine I'm at the Olympic Games, I'm competing in the 400 meters on Wednesday. Well, by Friday, I'm competing on a team with the people that I was competing on Wednesday against, right? We were all trying to become gold medalists in the Olympic 400 meters. And 3 days later, we have to come together as a team.
Completely different mindset.
Right, exactly. So some of my top rivals. So the key there was, making sure that everyone on that team was able to separate those two things and check any sort of rivalries, because we don't typically train together. We don't live together. We only know each other as rivals until we show up at the Olympic Games, and then we have our relay practices. And so you can always tell who's sort of, really dedicated to the team and who's in it for themselves. And great teams, we won gold medals many, many times. And it was because of our trust in one another and our ability to trust that everyone here is actually here for the team. Of course, we all have our individual goals, but in most cases, our individual goals fit within the team goals.
So that's you as part of a team. You obviously in your career, both in terms of your athletics and your broadcasting, have relied upon expert teams around you as well. Tell me who were the people that you most valued and what it was in them that they brought and enhanced for you.
Yeah, so obviously my coach throughout my career, I had a track coach, a strength coach, a manager as part of my team, my agent as part of the team, and everyone understood their particular assignment, their role, and was able to stay in their lane and have this respect of all of the other team members and their expertise in their particular area, and trust that, okay, this person's going to do their job. I was very fortunate that I was able to assemble a team of some of the best at what they do. And, so I think everyone was able to operate with confidence because they had so much trust in the ability and the expertise of all of the other team members.
Now, you've obviously achieved so much in your career, and you've probably inspired thousands of athletes in your career. What would you say about legacy and how important that is to you? And I guess if there are an audience here looking at what their legacy could be in the investment world, what do you think it is that motivated you to do what you did for as long as you did, but also now, I suppose, put an importance in what you leave behind too?
Yeah, it's really, I think it's all linked for me. I wanted to go out and be the best that I could be, truly honor the talent that I was born with, and I think that from a legacy standpoint, that has inspired a lot of people, and I'm very proud of that. legacy should be, I think, one of those things that you're not so deliberate about. You know, you go about your business, you try to be the best you can be, and, you know, hopefully it inspires other people. They see you as an example, they see what you've done, and, you know, whether that's one person or millions of people who, you know, will be inspired or learn a lesson from what you've done, or just by just watching you or listening to you, you know, you know, that's what it should be about, as opposed to deliberately trying to build this particular legacy and, you know, and craft this thing that people will remember you for. That's just not how I've ever approached it.
Leading by example.
Yeah, leading by example, and also, you know, just being true to, you know, how you want to live your life, and hopefully that is inspirational to others.
What do you take away from meeting your fans and being at an event like this where people want to talk to you? What do you take away? Are you still somebody who wants to sort of think, well, actually, I'm learning through life, I'm learning through new experiences? Is that important to you as in terms of your development still?
Absolutely. You know, the one thing that if there was one thing that, you know, I could point to as one of the most critical components of my success as an athlete and success I've had since retiring from my athletic career, is continuing to learn, primarily about myself. And I learn a lot about myself from talking to others and listening to other people. So yeah, you know, when I have the opportunity to connect with fans, when I'm speaking at events like this, and, you know, one of the best parts for me is the Q&A after I spoke. You know, the questions people come up with. I mean, a lot of them are typical, but you know, I learn a lot from those questions, of how I can be more useful to people, how I can be helpful to people in terms of their success. But absolutely, during my career, continuing to learn more about myself was critical to my success, and I've continued after my career as an athlete, continue to learn about, you know, how to get the best from myself, and, you know, sort of what inspires me, what motivates me, and what challenges me.
I'm sure this audience will have a lot of questions for you. One final one from me. If you had one bit of advice about sustained excellence, what would you say it would be?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to it again. It is, you know, sustained excellence is born out of sustained and consistent learning and unlocking, well, who am I and how do I get the best from myself in whatever moment or whatever situation that may be. So if you think about success over a long period of time, circumstances are going to change, challenges are going to come up, the world changes. If you have figured out, and you can constantly figure out how to get the best from yourself, regardless of the circumstance, you will be able to achieve sustained success.
Michael, it's been a total pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us in the studio.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thanks.